The psychedelic experience is a crazy one. Things we never thought were possible can literally be experienced on these substances. It's wild. Today in the 2020s, we are entering a psychedelic renaissance, as more and more people are starting to see past the negative stigmas around psychedelics and are having these intense experiences that, more often than not, ultimately changes the individual and society for the better. More and more people are sharing their experiences, and hundreds of thousands of people try a psychedelic for the first time each year. The intensity of the experience can vary dramatically depending on substance and dose. So I've divided the range of the psychedelic experience into 5 different levels, which vary from just a tiny sub-perceptual microdose to a full-blown ego death, and everything in between. I won't be elaborating much on different substances or exact dosages. You can educate yourself on that elsewhere. What I'll be going over is really what's going on in your consciousness while under the influence of these substances. Like, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? Etc. Without further ado, let's get into it. So at level 1, everything being experienced is just sub-perceptual. You likely cannot tell you're under the influence of any substance as there are no active effects. There are no visuals and no significant change in headspace. Basically, this level of the psychedelic experience is a microdose, which means taking 1/10 to 1/20th the amount of a typical dose of a psychedelic. The reasons people do this vary. Some people do it for a slight creativity boost, some do it for symptom relief of depression and/or stress, some do it for increased social abilities, and some do it for productivity purposes. When we refer to psychedelic trips, this is not at all what we're referring to. But nonetheless, thousands of people have reported immense positive benefit in their life from microdosing. Level 2 of the psychedelic experience is really where the active effects start coming on. A change in sensory input will likely take place, colors will become more vivid, you'll probably start seeing visuals such as slight swing of objects or patterns on the wall. You'll likely start feeling the first effects of an ego drop as social barriers begin to break down for you. Many people report being able to express themselves with words in ways they never had before. And for many people, social anxiety can fly out the window when they take a psychedelic. So the ego begins to weaken, but the id part of you, which is the very primitive, instinctual aspect of your psyche that the ego plays a role in suppressing, is still very much intact. So you may begin to feel a very primal feeling. You might feel like you want to run around. You might feel like you want to beat your chest. Maybe you'll feel horny. For me, I like to just make random facial expressions for seemingly no reason at all when I'm feeling like this. But other than these effects, you can experience further creativity enhancement, more so than what was mentioned in level 1. You may feel euphoria, but you can also feel anxiety here if you have something nagging at your subconscious. So level 3 is where things really get juicy. Visuals will be much more intense, and you may experience blending of the senses, so you may hear color or see sound or something like that. Time will also be distorted. 10 seconds could feel like 10 minutes, or 3 hours could feel like 20 minutes. Your mind will likely begin to race here, so you can get into some pretty distractive thought patterns and loops, and short-term memory will likely be impaired. There's also a further breaking down of social barriers and conditioning, and more so than level 2. People who trip with friends or partners often create significantly deeper connections with them as they begin to stop viewing how the other person is different from them. The ego stops making judgments about the other person. The ego stops comparing, and all that's left to see is the ways in which you are the same. The further breaking down of barriers and conditioning can also leave one with some revelatory insights about not only oneself, but society, or all of humanity, or the entire structure of the universe. This level of the psychedelic experience really allows one to break out of the content of reality and observe it from sort of like a third-person point of view. Maybe you'll realize negative thought patterns that had been governing your life. Maybe you will feel like you understand what the meaning of life is. Maybe you'll realize just how bullshit chasing material pleasures is. But there will likely be a realization that life isn't what you thought it was, and perhaps that you aren't who you thought you were. Having this experience may lead one to pursue greater degrees of self-inquiry or to walk the spiritual path. level 4, the lines between self and other begin to break down. The distinction between body and environment begins to fade away as consciousness dissociates from the ego. For some people, this can be a relatively peaceful experience, but for others, this can bring on an existential panic, as the ego senses a danger and it will think it's dying, which can literally lead you to think that you are dying. I've been on both ends of the peaceful and horrifying spectrum. In one of my experiences, I felt as if I was about to ascend to the next dimension, and I was fully under the impression that I'd never go back to my body or see any of my family or friends ever again. But I didn't feel bad about this. I felt like this next dimension would be better and that it was just a process of life. But on one of my other experiences, as my ego began to fade away, I felt that existential panic, and it was the single worst experience of my life. And that experience alone has kept me from venturing to these deeper levels of the psychedelic realm since then. Nonetheless, these experiences have changed my life, made me realize that the universe is so insanely complex and that as a human being, we are limited in what we can know. But I felt that everything is interconnected, and even though the universe's complexity is beyond my ability to grasp, there's a deep intelligence behind it all, and everything that is happening for a reason, and that ultimately everything will be okay in the end, because this may sound cliche, but love is the answer. And my experience is in no way unique. Thousands of people report pretty much the exact same or very similar experiences on these higher doses of psychedelics. In fact, it's crazy how similar people's experiences on these higher doses are, and the insights obtained from them are all virtually the same. But it's important to note here that the ego is not completely gone at this level. If it was, then it'd be level 5, and as far as visuals go, they'll likely encompass most of your vision, depending on substance of course, as visuals vary in strength and shape depending on substance. Time will seem practically meaningless here. You might even completely forget that time even exists, as for many people, time just stops being perceived completely. Level 5 is achieved when the self is completely 100% eradicated. You are no longer experiencing the world in any way, shape, or form in the lens of your ego. You're past the panic from level 4 because there is no longer an ego to do the panicking. This is enlightenment. This is nirvana. There is no time nor space here. There is no suffering nor desire because there can only be suffering if there is a self to desire. In this state, there is no self. You're nothing and you're everything simultaneously. You're infinite. There's no scale to measure what you are and what you aren't. You're just a formless awareness at peace. The ego, the mechanism that's evolved for millions of years to keep you alive, is completely gone here. And the preceding 4 stages have led up to this death of the ego. It's like that slight creativity enhancement and drop in stress and anxiety from stage 1 is the first glimmer of the ego starting to fade and the true self seeping through. And then in stage 2 and 3, that's elevated when the social barriers and conditioning that your ego clings to start to go away, and you begin to see things for the way they truly are, rather than what your ego projects onto them. Then in stage 4, it's even more elevated when the ego begins to dissociate from your awareness, and you feel as if you're dissolving into the environment around you. And then finally, if the conditions are right, the substance is right, and the dose is right, you experience level 5. You get a taste of what the Buddha and other spiritual prophets have been talking about this entire time. Then from there, your ego slowly returns, and before long, you're back to exactly where you were before, but you're changed. Having your ego fade away will surely be a life-changing experience for anyone. I went from a stone-cold atheist 2 or 3 years ago to being a very spiritual person today. Take psychedelics with caution. Don't blindly take them. Have intentions and stay safe. That's all I have for this video. Make sure to give it a like and comment, as engagement on the video promotes it so more people can see it. If you want to support my work on a deeper level and or are interested in joining a book club related to psychedelics and spirituality, consider checking out my Patreon. Link will be in the description. And as always guys, have a great day and peace.